So a fundamental quality that we are looking to create in our relationships with others is something that I call mutual accountability. That doesn't obviously make sense to folks, so I'm going to try and tease that apart. But the key point of it is that it's important that we be sensitive to how it is that we impact each other, and in that sense, we be accountable to and with each other and for each other. But we have some difficulty in our society because we have this notion of what accountability is when we're actually going to hold someone accountable. And the idea of holding someone accountable is really about demanding that they give an account of themselves. What are you doing here? This is not what your job is supposed to be. And so we are, in a sense, calling people on the carpet by holding them accountable. And that, frankly, gives accountability a bad name, because who wants to be accountable when it's about a public shaming for the fact that you haven't done your job right? So I want to be very clear that I want to talk about accountability in different terms than this. It actually fits to talk about holding people accountable, but we're talking about accountability in a much larger frame than this. Accountability is the ability to take into account ability to take into account how it is that we impact each other. How is what I'm doing impacting you? How is what you're doing impacting me? And the more we can both be aware of how it is that we are impacting each other, and we act in response to that awareness, the more we are mutually accountable. And that's a quality that we're looking to create in all of our relationships as a way of creating the most robust and durable sense of a healthy relationship. All right, so we're going to kind of lean into understanding what this means, because it's a little more complex than it seems at first blush. So we need to start by talking about abuse, because abuse is, when we're being abusive, we're not being accountable. So it's sort of like the opposite of accountability. And by abuse, and people define abuse in different ways. So I want to be clear that when I'm talking about abuse, what I'm talking about is whenever I'm using the power that I have over another to take what I want at their expense. And so that's much broader than any kind of definition of criminal abuse. Sometimes I would have occasion to speak about folks' behavior, and if I reference something that they were doing that was abusive, they think I was accusing them of a crime. No, I'm talking about doing the things that are harmful to others because we're trying to create what we need, but instead we're grabbing what we want, and we have the power to do that. And when that's at somebody else's expense, that's what abuse is. One of the problems that people have with this definition is that by this definition, we all do things that are abusive. We all, from time to time, have used the power that we have over others to create what we want, to somehow take what we feel like we deserve, maybe, but it's at the expense of someone else. And whenever I'm trying to create what I need, but somebody else does, it takes it away from somebody else, it's not actually what I need, it's what I want. So part of it is that we need to be really clear here that we all are capable of and have at sometimes behaved in ways that is a kind of abuse. Sometimes people will experience us as being abusive. When we really look at it, it's simply that we're not being who they want us to be. So simply because I'm accused of abuse doesn't mean I'm being abusive. But when we go back to looking at the whole question of cultivating critical feedback, I still want to know if you're feeling abused by me. I mean, let's look at what's going on here. All right. So one of the things that we construct with abuse is victims. Someone is the victim of the abuse. But victims arise in different forms. If there's an event in which I am harmed, someone used their power to drive their car into mine or whatever, I am the victim of that event. So there's a sense of being a victim as a product of a singular event. Sometimes we may have found ourselves in a relationship in which we were persistently losing. The other person was persistently getting what they needed at our expense. So it wasn't just an event. It was kind of like the role in the relationship is for me to be the victim. And when we have had multiple relationships in which we've been in that role, with our parents, with our partners, with our bosses. When we persistently experience ourselves as the victim of their abuse, it becomes almost more of a kind of an identity. This is who I understand myself to be in my relationship with the world around me, is a victim. We don't want any of that. But it's important that we look at how it is that we are constructing our sense of being in a relationship. And in fact, we're not just victims. We are at times the perpetrator of abuse, and we are at almost all times the bystander. It's very helpful for us in the context of our relationships with others to observe, how is it that I'm the victim of this? How is it that I'm the perpetrator of abuse within this? And how am I a bystander observing what I experience as abuse between others? And until I can see from all three perspectives, I'm not seeing the whole relationship. So we want to be able to be very robust about, yeah, sometimes I'm the victim. Yeah, sometimes I'm the perpetrator. And pretty much at all times, I'm a bystander. I can see this going on in the world. All right, so we want to be able to create stable and just relationships. And a stable relationship is one in which rights and responsibilities are balanced. If we have equal rights and responsibilities, then there's a kind of harmony within the relationship. If I have a lot of responsibilities, but I don't have very many rights, I've got all this stuff that I've got to do, but I don't really have the power to make it happen, I'm going to be feeling oppressed. And in fact, I am structurally oppressed by the fact that something's being expected of me that I don't have the power to create. On the other hand, if I have lots of rights and I have very few responsibilities, then I'm privileged. And somebody else is getting abused because they're the ones who have to make up for the experience of privilege. And this happens throughout any kind of relationship. It happens in huge ways between privileged countries and underprivileged or underdeveloped or under-resourced countries, where the people there have to overfunction in order to create what the privileged folks need. If you want to just look at the sugar industry, for example, and what it's like for sugarcane workers, that'd be a good example of how it is that we construct abusive dynamics, where some people have a lot of responsibilities but very few rights, and some people have lots of rights but very few responsibilities. So it's really important that we maintain a balance between those two so we're in harmony. And there are actually three different ways that we can construct these stable relationships. A fiduciary, a mutual, and a reciprocal relationship. In a fiduciary relationship, I have rights because I have responsibilities. As a teacher, as a coach, as a psychotherapist, as a father, as a police officer, as a judge, there are lots of relationships in which one person has more power than the other because they have responsibility for the welfare of the other. So I'm teaching this class, so I get to decide what we talk about. But I have a responsibility to make sure that my students, in fact, are learning something easily and well that has genuine value for them. So I have the right because I have the responsibility. It's a fiduciary relationship. In a mutual relationship, everybody's got the same rights and responsibilities. So there's an intrinsic balance there as long as we sustain that mutuality. It's very hard to do that. It's really hard to make decisions in a mutual relationship. How are we going to decide when we both have equal power here? And so a mutuality is difficult to do, but deep intimacy is really only possible within a mutual relationship. In a reciprocal relationship, I have certain rights and you have certain rights, and my rights are to match your responsibilities and vice versa. So, for example, if I've hired you to put in a new concrete walk out front of my place, you're a contractor, and we've agreed that it's going to be 4 feet wide, and it's going to have 3 inches of gravel and 3 inches of concrete, and it's going to run for 40 feet, whatever. And for that, you're going to get paid $10,000 or whatever, right? So we have a contract. I have a right to expect that I'm going to get my sidewalk built to the specs that we determined, right? I have a right to that. You have a right to me paying you the money that I owe you. So you have a responsibility for building my sidewalk, and I have a responsibility for paying you. So that it is a reciprocal arrangement that we have constructed by some kind of contract. Sometimes contracts are not formal. When my wife and I are working in the garden, the contract is that she tells me where to dig a hole, and I dig it. She's in charge, right? My privilege is that I don't have to make the decisions. I just have to dig the holes. So in any kind of relationship, but sometimes it's going to be fiduciary, sometimes it's going to be mutual, sometimes it's going to be reciprocal. And if they're well formed, they're just, they're stable, they balance rights and responsibilities. The problem is that sometimes these relationships are not well formed. They get lopsided. And so we need accountability within each of them. And it's a different kind of accountability. If I'm talking about accountability, I'm going to blow this up a little bit for you here. We're accountable to others when we're in a fiduciary relationship. The fiduciary is responsible to the person that they're acting on behalf of. So my financial planner is accountable to me. I'm not accountable to my financial planner. He's accountable to me, right? In a mutual relationship, we're accountable with. We each have the same rights and responsibilities. We're each responsible for taking care of ourselves and being present to the others. And as long as we maintain that balance, we're in good shape. And if we're accountable for the rights of the other within a reciprocal relationship, then that becomes a just, balanced, fair, stable relationship. So that's what we're looking to do, to be able to create these different kinds of accountability. So the exercise for us now, this discipline, is to do what we call a statement of accountability. And this essentially is 4 steps here. The first is for me to be able to find a time in my life, or you for a time in your life, when you made a choice that you regret, that was harmful for someone else. You really wish you hadn't done that. And we want to be able to look back and find, what is the thing that I did that was the most problematic, I have the most regret about. This is something that I really feel bad about. So these are the things that we want to be able to deal with. And I want the biggest one because that will give me the biggest bang for my buck. So as I think about this time, I want to identify, what was the harm that I did to the other, to the relationship? Certainly I did harm to myself in the process, but we're not really focusing on how we harmed ourselves at this point. How did I harm the other? How did I harm the relationship? And then as I look at that, I say, what in the world was going on with me that I made that choice? If you'd asked me the week before I made that choice, if that was anything that I was ever going to do, I would say, no, I would never do anything like that. I'm not like that. So I'm not going to, so I would have said, no, I don't do that. But I did. So then the question is, what was going on with me that I did that? What were the various factors going on in my life that made that seem like the best choice in the moment? And the final step then is to look at, what are each of those things? How do each of those continue to show up in my life now, or at least potentially? And what am I doing in my life now to address each of those factors that caused me to make this choice that I regret? Okay, so that's the assignment for the week, is to do the statement of accountability by identifying what was the choice I regret, what harm did it do, what was going on with me when I did it, and how am I going to show up differently, how am I addressing each of those so that I'm going to show up differently in the future. All right, good luck with that.